Thanks, Delegate Solomon. I appreciate that. Appreciate all the elected officials who put this together, and Eden Durbin, and then my colleagues who are on the panel. I'll get right to it. Delegate Shetty made a comment about the unprecedented need that we've seen during this time. And I think that that's because we have all of this inequality and these inequities all around us. And this crisis has just illuminated that and shown who doesn't have the ability to quarantine in a convenient fashion, for example, and who struggles daily. And so this, I think there's been a lot of revelation around this crisis, and it has shown us that we have tolerated too much inequality and too much inequity and hardship for people who live around us. We know that in the county, for example, there's about 250,000 people who live day to day really without the means to get by without assistance at some point. And so that number is much higher than we would see if we saw, for example, how many people live in poverty, which uses numbers that are too low. So from the moment we went to remote work on March 14th, we've had this focus on making this a recovery for all, because we know that despite the cliches, we're not all in this together, that some people are having a much tougher time and had a much tougher time right away. So our focus has been on that. And Eden, if you want to go to the next slide, we can look at, people will talk about stages of the crisis, and there are these stages. They really are 1, 2, and 3 as opposed to 1, 1, and 1. But the triage stage is really determined by the crisis itself. And so this is a rather insidious crisis, a recession. You know, we don't have to socially distant and close our businesses the way we have had to during this. And so I don't know how long the triage will go. We hope that it overlaps with the recovery quickly and we can move into some recovery. But we find ourselves in this kind of triage stage now where the needs of our community are much different than they will be when we go into recovery. And then what I hope is that when we hit the systemic change portion of this, that we have the ability to make sure that the next problem, whether it's a recession or a relapse of this particular virus or whatever it is, that we don't see such unequal death rates and such great inequalities. The hope is that we can address them now as we go forward. And I put that phrase, danger and opportunity, because the Chinese symbol, of course, for crisis, as many of you know, is made up of both the symbol for danger and the symbol for opportunity. We have so much loss in our families and our friends, and we all know somebody who has been lost to this or has a family member who has been lost to this. So that is the tough part of this. The other part is that there are a lot of opportunities for us seeing these inequities to go now and create greater structures, greater infrastructure, and systems that will allow for us to have more equal footing as we go forward. Next slide. So the overview of the current landscape, I can share just a few thoughts on that. Since we've gone into this remote work, we've been on the phone with over 5,000 people we serve, and those 5,000 people are either people who are living in poverty or close to poverty. And so we're hearing about what the most pressing needs are by talking with them every day. And the first thing we found was that they just didn't have a lot of contact, that the people we serve, our phone call to them was the only phone call they had. So the social isolation of this crisis is presenting a lot of challenges. And so if anybody is out there in the mental health field, we're going to need you more than ever, right? There's a lot of trauma people are experiencing and a lot of social isolation from watching all this awful news and not having someone with whom they can talk about. So our phone calls in the past, we would have maybe a 2-minute or 3-minute confirmation call or appointment call, and those calls have become 30 and 40-minute phone calls where people are asking us to call back just so they have someone to talk to. We are also providing a lot of resources on health and accessing food, and of course, different housing challenges, all the challenges they have now. They're still afraid what happens to them during this time and when we come out of it. So our phone calls are showing that. Obviously, there's a tremendous need for food, and I'm going to let Jackie talk about that because Jackie and Manna have done such a tremendous job in Montgomery County of responding to this right away. And so I'm excited to hear you, Jackie. But we're also hearing a lot of transportation needs. And so we've partnered with Lyft to, no, you can go back, Eden, thanks. But so we're hearing a lot of transportation needs. So we're partnering with Lyft to help with that. And of course, there's a lot of grief and anxiety. And so we're spending a lot of time on the phone with folks. So even though we're not in this together, I hope, or we're not experiencing this in the same ways, I hope we can come out of this together. Thanks, Eden, go ahead. And equity is just a quick comment on equity, which defines really how we come out of this together, is that when we start getting supplies and when we are able to get back at our lives the way we used to, that we know, for example, in a county of 1 million plus, if we get 100,000 masks that become available, we get most of those masks to people who need them first, people who have to ride public transportation, people who live in concentrated poverty or crowded areas. So we're gonna have to sacrifice those of us who have a more convenient quarantine to make sure that those who don't have such convenient quarantine can get back at it and can be safe. Next slide. So what we typically do in terms of furnishing homes, we hope to resume furnishing homes and bringing people back in June, and we hope that you can start to donate those items. We get thousands of donations of items every month. We hope you can start doing that again in June. We're getting some extra storage space to help with that. Next slide, Eden, we'll talk about what we're doing today. We're doing food distribution. We do that where we're asked to do it. So this county has done a really good job. There are some communities in Southeast DC where there's real deep deprivation and hunger. And so we're working with World Central Kitchen to distribute food every single day in those communities. We're providing resources for health and housing. And I just wanted to put it out there to anybody on the call who's listening in or watching that if you want to become a job coach or help people with resumes or engage in a wide array of workforce development support, we have those opportunities. You can just email us, email Adam, A-D-A-M, at awidercircle.org, and we'll find ways where you can help provide resources or your support to workforce development. We could send job seekers to you, for example, on a phone call where you could be an informational interview source. So there are a lot of ways to get involved with that kind of workforce development. Next slide, and I'll just finish up. I want to be conscious of time. We're doing a lot of this long-term recovery work, and so we're having a town hall a week from, well, now 2 days ago, so May 13 at 11 a.m. And we're bringing some people who are working directly in healthcare and with child and family services who will share what the impact of this virus has been on the health and well-being of children and families who are most vulnerable among us. Thanks, Eden. Next slide. Opportunities for you to give. We love being a part of Zoom events like this. So for example, I was on a Zoom event with leaders from Bethesda Chevy Chase High School, about 15 students, and we talked about, I told them to identify a nonprofit organization and do something. So they picked the Maryland Food Bank, and they've raised $500 for the Maryland Food Bank. So we've done it with neighborhoods and communities and businesses and faith communities. So if you wanted to organize a Zoom, we would love to be on it and share with the people who are on it how you can help the community. You could participate in the virtual race to end poverty. Maybe some of you are, that'd be great. Your financial donations are always great. We always can find good use for them, propelling us forward. We've kept our team whole at a wider circle, paying everyone in full, keeping the benefits in full. And that's a commitment we just make to one another as we try to go through it together as a staff. And I would just say, get your stuff ready. When we open our warehouse, we hope you will start bringing donations by. So put them in a pile somewhere or eyeball that furniture that you no longer need, but it's in great shape, and get ready to donate that stuff. When we open, we would love to have it. Finally, I would just say, next slide, that there are ways that you can, look at your neighbors differently, recognizing that you need to connect with them more. The backdrop of these slides is an aspen grove, because an aspen grove, we know the root system of an aspen grove is all one. All these trees are connected beneath the ground. That's a metaphor for, I think, how we exist. We know that we need to be educated on the inequities that exist and then engage with them. So voting is one way. I would say right away, make sure you vote. Second, I would participate in the census. We can't door-to-door knock on the census the way we used to, so you're going to have to advocate for people to get involved in the census, especially in the more vulnerable communities, so the representation is true. I think becoming an activist, many of you are already activists. I love that idea, and so I would encourage you to just engage as much as you can. And there are ways to do it remotely right now. Like I said, becoming a job coach, I'm sure that we'll hear from the other speakers about ways you can engage as a volunteer in a remote fashion. I'll stop with that. Imagining a better world doesn't mean just in your head. It means having conversations with your neighbors and your friends and family to make sure that you start to talk about these inequities that we see and have these kind of informed conversations where you can be someone who can tell people what they can do so that the next time we have a crisis, we don't see such dramatic differences. That's enough for me. I appreciate the time. Sorry I went over a little bit.
Thank you, Mark, and we'll turn it over to Diego.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. Within the darkness of the situation that we're living in, being in Montgomery County is a blessing, a true blessing. Identity serves around 3,500 4,000 young people plus their families, so the tenth of thousands every year. And we focus on three areas: education, social emotional supports, and workforce and employment services. But as of a month and a half, 2 months ago, we had to quickly make a change, shift, and pivot towards meeting the needs of those whom we serve. These are folks whose families lost their income from 1 week to the other, who did not have any savings, and whose basic needs were not being met, and they were unable to do much about that because of COVID and other circumstances. So we immediately pivoted to try to address those needs. The four most important needs that we're working on, one has to do with food, and Jackie will talk about that, but we complement what Jackie and others do, what the school system is doing, and also we transport food to families where other agencies have no access to. In terms of housing, we are focusing on a sector of the population who has informal leases. Because of the underground economy, they do not have a formal lease, and you have families renting one room within a 3-bedroom apartment, and you have 4 people living in 1 bedroom, and obviously they don't have a lease. You have folks who rent a couch, folks who rent a closet, and the people who they pay rent to sort of do not know or do not abide by the eviction freeze. So all these folks are in extremely, extremely vulnerable positions. So we partner with the county and with foundations. Philanthropy has been amazing, individuals who are providing resources to support these families so that they stay in place during the pandemic. So we are being very fortunate, and our community as a whole, but particularly those with informal leases, are extremely grateful to Montgomery County as a whole for the pouring of support that they have been receiving. So thank you to all of you who, even if you have not done it, your values support our elected officials who made these decisions. The other piece that is extremely important to us is education. I'll talk more about education, and I'll talk about mental health, but if we can not go to the next slide quickly. So in education, we're focusing on identity together with the NAACP. A year, 2 years ago, founded the Black and Brown Coalition, and the inequities that pre-existed before COVID are in full display now, where Black and Brown students and poor students are just not learning, not because of MCPS doing a bad job. They're doing an amazing job, but you cannot solve by giving people a Chromebook and Wi-Fi issues that overcrowding, domestic violence, sexual abuse, physical abuse, again, housing insecurity, food insecurity. There's no way to learn. And most of you who are parents or who are caring for young people and helping them with their online lessons know that a lot of this is on you. The majority of the parents of the kids that we work with did not complete elementary school in a different language. So it's very difficult for them to support these young children. So these young children are falling further and further behind. So the Black and Brown Coalition came up with specific asks regarding education, focusing on recovery. So what should recovery look like once the pandemic is over? Because the fact is that these young people are not learning. And when we were concerned before about the summer slide, now we have kids who were behind before, and now you have 3, 4, 5, 6, however many months. So we need to think about equity. And Mark talked about equity before, and equity applies to education as well. So what does equity look like? I'll just give you a few examples. If you're interested, I'm happy to share the asks of the Black and Brown Coalition to the council, to the Board of Education, to the candidates, the board candidates, as to what we need. But one is that if classes have to, brick and mortar classes are back, social distances will force the school to choose who comes to classes first. we believe that those who lost the most learning should be able to come first. We believe that as part of these efforts, also the school system should focus on trauma. These young people have extremely high levels of ACEs. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, which is tremendous trauma. And those traumas are being exacerbated during COVID because of some of the things that I mentioned before. We believe that experienced teachers should be teaching these young people in recovery, but not just recovery. They never had the fundamentals. So they've been going from first to second to third without knowing the fundamentals. So let's seize the opportunity, as Mark mentioned, and let's focus on the fundamentals of math and reading. There's a chance that some teachers might retire and a few teachers will come back to the system. And if that is the case, we do not want all the novice teachers, the new teachers working with the most impacted youth. We want equity in that as well. Anyways, those are just some examples of, and I'll be happy to share this with all of you. The next slide, please. In terms of mental health, identity had to pivot immediately because, as I mentioned before, we did a needs assessment. We do regular needs assessments of the community, and not just the young people had suffered tremendous trauma, but also the parents. And you must have read on the news and heard people talk about the huge escalation in levels of anxiety, depression, domestic violence, as I mentioned before, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And this mental health epidemic is hitting our community really, really hard. Imagine living in a 3-bedroom apartment with 3 or 4 families and having the perpetrator live with you and having no space to go to. It is really complicated. So what we have done at Identity is, in the past 3 weeks, we have begun and we train already our staff. We believe that it's not viable to have individual therapists work with this community. It's just impractical and impossible to afford. But we as human beings have the ability to help others by doing active listening, by providing tips, by helping clients, encourage them to do mandatory reporting, etc. So we train all of our staff. We're doing individual sessions with our staff. We don't call them mental health sessions because they're not mental health sessions. Call them coaching, so coaching, mentoring. We also do psychoeducational groups, topic specific, and open support groups. And then we do county-wide webinars. So those are the ways in which Identity has shifted to meet the actual needs of those whom we serve. My last thoughts is in terms of what you can do. Again, maintaining the culture of the county is the most important thing you can do. Your values must be shared with elected officials so the elected officials continue to support those who are our most vulnerable neighbors. Another silver lining within the COVID pandemic is that individuals that some members of society called pariahs are now actually seen as heroes because they are actually the ones who are working in the supermarket, who are serving us in this time. So it's beginning to shift the image that some had about our neighbors, or some of our neighbors, and now it's showing how these neighbors are willing to sacrifice their lives, their health, and that of their families because they go back home. They don't have a separate room they can isolate to. They go to the same room together with the family. The enormous sacrifice this community is doing for all of us. And last but not least, there's another thing you can do with Identity, which is if you speak Spanish, if you have time, we have enormous needs. So if you want to help us with case management, we can enlist you as someone who walks some of our clients through the needs that they have. So with that, I say thank you, and thank you so much for joining on a Friday afternoon, rainy here, so that you can see how you can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. I'll turn it over to Jackie.
myself. Thank you. As Jared already mentioned, I am a proud District 18 constituent, so glad to see the whole delegation and appreciative of their leadership. Especially appreciative to Jared for, if we could stay with that slide, please. Really appreciative of Jared. He's on our advocacy task force, and several members of the task force are on this call today. Shout out to Eden, who a couple of weeks ago helped us distribute food. So we're all in District 18, and it's really gratifying. Also, so honored to be on this call with CASA. In the early days, they reached out to us and talked about needing to do delivery to some folks who were in danger of falling through the cracks because of their documented status, and we connected them with the Food Security Task Force. We're working with Identity to use their very important networks to get the word out through word of mouth about our services, and definitely in solidarity with a wider circle and continue to be. We, as part of our strategic plan before COVID, set out a vision of food for all, where all people at all times have access to good food and welcoming spaces. And all times includes pandemics. It also includes the economic recession that we're all going to need to work through in the coming months and years so that there is equity. The folks that I represent are on this slide. These are the people on the front lines who are making sure that we can stay safe and keep serving. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing and where. It's already been touched on, and we all unfortunately know that sometimes your zip code is your destiny. What you're seeing here is the first 6 weeks of the pandemic, where there were the requests for services from MANA. So MANA always, at all times, has a framework of food as medicine. We're trying to share healthy, culturally appropriate food wherever we're asked for. But in terms of the district, just to highlight, my zip code 20895 in the first 6 weeks only had 6 requests for food, whereas also in the district 20906 had 109 requests, and those numbers continue to grow. We've seen double the requests for services, and fortunately, because we have all of our staff still serving, we've kept all of our sites open, and in fact have expanded and increased some of our services. So what those look like, if you could go to the next slide, is that we are staying safe. We have basically re-engineered everything we've done before and added some new things like food delivery. But I want to take an opportunity to thank the county council. As Diego said, you're all constituents, and they helped us with the budget appropriation so that we could work in partnership with MCPS. We typically would give 3,000 smart sacks every Friday through a network of schools. Today, we're giving 6,120 smart sacks out. And that's because the community, the council, but also individuals like you, foundations, businesses have really stepped up for MANA, and that has allowed us to do what we needed to do to keep up with this need. And so all of those staff members that you saw, they always receive a living wage, but we've been able to pay hazard pay and make sure that they can stay safe and protect themselves with PPE that we've purchased, hand sanitizer, and all of that. So that's all because of you. The next slide is showing some of our volunteers in action. The new thing that we've done is created a Stay Put pack. We've doubled the amount of people who need us, but we've quadrupled the amount of food that we've purchased. And that's for a variety of reasons. But one is that we have these Stay Put packs, which are helping people who are seniors or medically compromised stay at home as they should. And we are giving them about a week's worth of food. If you go to the next slide, you'll see one of the inspirations for us and for the future. And this is a quote from one of our volunteers, a volunteer food runner who's getting those Stay Put packs out. And she talked about how a benefit of volunteering is seeing the world of her neighbors. And she says, may we never return to normal. Normal wasn't working. And that is our vision too, as we approach food for all, or as Mark was saying, recovery for all. So some of the things that have worked well that you may want to replicate, or it might spark your creativity, is a teenager named Marabella did a run for us this is COVID-19. And so she ran 1.9 kilometers for 19 hours and raised $6,000. The Forest Estates neighborhood did a food drive and dropped the food off, no contact drop off, at our Gaithersburg warehouse. We had Churchill High School, their cooking club baked cookies for us, and they dropped it off at our warehouse and our market in Silver Spring, which was a nice sweet treat. The Kensington Women's Boot Camp wrote notes of encouragement, which are now all over our warehouse, in our break room, and in our market in Silver Spring. Those are all things that you can do. You can also, if you think back to that first slide, and those, what is now 40 people, we've hired 6 additional folks to help us keep up with the needs. 40 people who are either remotely working or who are on the front line serving. On our website, you can call their work lines and tell them thank you. That would be a great thing to do. So however you're helping, we really appreciate it, because we know that we're going to need the community to be together in the long term for the economic recovery. And we couldn't do our work without you. And we are so privileged to be able to be side by side with everybody in District 18, but throughout Montgomery County.
Thanks, Jackie. And turning it over to George.
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you so much a big thank you to Delegate Solomon for putting this together. And I am also really privileged to be on this call with these great partners that are really doing everything they can to respond to this crisis. Briefly, I think what we wanted to talk about a bit was a little bit about the disproportionate impact that this pandemic is having, particularly on the community that CASA serves in its majority, and that's the undocumented community. Wanted to go back real quick to something Mark said, because it was so well put about the insidious nature of this pandemic, and that's particularly seen in how it is attacking a community that has already been vulnerable in many different ways. So I wanted to put a little bit of a highlight and give a little bit of a context of why it is that we're seeing these numbers skyrocket in our community. Real quickly, I mean, I think if you check the Maryland Department of Health trackers on tracking system on the cases overall, I mean, you'll notice right away how the impact that this is having in communities such as Langley Park in Prince George's County, and Wheaton in District 18's own backyard, right? We're seeing those numbers just skyrocket at a time where we're also talking about how to get back to work and how to bring back normality. So it's really important that folks have a little bit of a background on how this is impacting our community. So right off the bat, I put a couple of stats on there for your reference, but you'll notice that because of the immigration status tied to our community, many are ineligible for any type of health coverage, something that is vital at a time of a public health crisis. But you'll notice that about 45% of the Latino community in Montgomery County itself is ineligible for any type of health insurance. So when you combine Prince George's County with Montgomery County itself, you're talking about over 100,000 hardworking individuals that don't have insurance and therefore don't have an immediate resource to tap when they're getting sick, don't have an immediate outlet to receive a consult on how to manage their worsening sickness. You'll also notice that our community is disproportionately employed currently in the essential businesses that are still open today, which just furthers the risk factors associated with the community, right? One of the ironies of our community is that we're both disproportionately represented in those businesses that are being shut down, in the hospitality industry, restaurant industry, and we have many laid off workers that are undocumented now. that don't have that don't have that previous job, and because of their status are ineligible for unemployment benefits. And on the other hand, we're also disproportionately employed in those essential businesses, the maintenance workers, the cleaners, the people that are making sure that our buildings are being sanitized. And those individuals are using public transportation to get to those jobs. So another way in which some of those social distancing issues are a factor, right? So many of these individuals are holding multiple part-time jobs with no benefits. Again, increasing a major contributing factor to the increase in the incidence of COVID within the community itself. And of course, it was touched on earlier, right? Because of their disproportionate representation in these low-wage jobs, they're also in tight quarters, in very much sharing rental units in their living arrangements, right? It's not uncommon to see our community having multiple families in one bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment. Again, very difficult to have social distancing and isolation in those areas. And again, you'll see that has led to the large disparity in exposure for our community, particularly now, especially in Maryland, and especially in the communities covered by both District 18 and neighboring communities. You know, if you look on that that tracker, today was a very sad day indeed for our community. Just in Langley Park next door in Prince George's County, in the 20783 zip code. Today we broke 1,000 COVID positive cases. Now over 1,057 cases. That's more than twice than the second and third place runners up for this really sad contest. And of course we have the Wheaton area with now almost getting close to 600 cases, and the 20906 zip code with a little more than 500 cases. So again, just in those 3 zip codes alone, we're looking at more than 2,000 cases. So unfairly represented in the total cases, number of positives we have. And again, you know, it's not a surprise for many folks, but the CARES Act that was supposed to bring some federal stimulus, some additional support for our community, for all of us suffering from COVID, that federal stimulus paycheck, our community is completely excluded from that, despite the fact that many of them have an ITIN number, an individual tax identification number, and have been paying their taxes over decades at a time. But unfortunately, even if you have one undocumented individual in that particular household, the entire household is ineligible to receive a cent from that federal stimulus payment, including US citizen children of undocumented individuals. That's one of the reasons that we announced a lawsuit against the CARES Act. CASA is pursuing a lawsuit that we announced on Tuesday. And currently, we're working with our local senators and our local federal representatives to see if we can use this as leverage to create, to make sure that the next federal stimulus package is a lot more inclusive for our community. So real quick on that next slide. So given that we have these very difficult, basically long-standing institutional discriminatory practices, what do we do now, right? I understand a lot of people are frustrated, understanding the injustices that are going on, understanding that they're long-standing discriminatory practices, and so what can we do about it now? I think one of the things that we really want to say that, you know, especially in District 18 and all over Montgomery County, we have seen an overflow of generosity going towards volunteer opportunities, cash donations. It has really been amazing to see the community respond. And there's still opportunities today. At CASA, we've established our own, what we call it, our Solidarity Fund. So that's, again, trying to work with individual donors to try to pull money together to try to give cash donations to people that are ineligible for the federal stimulus program. And we congratulate the county council and the county executive to create the ERP program, which is a funny name, but it's over $6 million that's going to be distributed to undocumented families, right? And we're proud to partner them and happy that this is happening. but additional help is needed. So your donations to these funds are incredibly important, as is all the assistance and volunteer time helping food banks, for example. And we heard Jackie speak about the many opportunities we have at MANA. We also have established a food bank and doing a non-contact food delivery program, and always could use more volunteers to help us run those routes to needy families all over our footprint. So for those opportunities, we're happy to have you volunteer through our website. And I think over the long term, and I know we're running short on time, but just real briefly over the long term, I just want to always remind folks that we need to address these long-standing discriminatory practices, right? We need to create a comprehensive, we need to advocate for comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level, and locally, we have to create more programs that include access to primary health care for everybody, regardless of immigration status, rental assistance for everyone, and equal protections for all workers, right? Because pandemics are not discriminating based on our immigration status. So we have an incredible opportunity to learn from this experience and really demand more of our federal government. So thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, George, and thank you to all of our presenters. So we are really lucky to be joined by Councilmember Gabe Albernaz, who's an at-large council member, also another District 18 resident. Gabe was kind enough to join us after a council session. Gabe chairs the Human Services Committee for the Health and Human Services Committee for the council, and Gabe's just going to give us a quick rundown of some of the great county programs that are available to help. So Gabe, I will turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Jared. And I want to begin by thanking the entire District 18 delegation. I am a District 18 resident, and I could not be more proud of all of you and the work that you've been doing, both since you've been elected, but especially during the COVID crisis. You're doing an outstanding job. And I can't thank the organizations who are on this call enough. I am intimately familiar with all of you. You are all friends. And the way that each of you in the entire nonprofit sector has stepped up is helping me sleep a little bit, just a little bit better at night, because it's been obviously difficult. And as you heard, we are seeing overflowing need in every category. And it is something that's difficult to process, but we on the council are trying to do everything possible in partnership with the executive branch to address both the needs within the COVID crisis currently, but are already significantly thinking about post-COVID and what the world will look like with the recession being deeper than anything we've experienced, certainly in my lifetime. And as you heard, the heartbreaking story after heartbreaking story of how this has exposed the gaps in the system and basically placed them on steroids, to the degree to which it's disproportionately impacting our undocumented community, our minority community, our disability community, our senior community. Every vulnerable population right now is just getting crushed. And it has been very difficult to see this happening. But I do want to thank these organizations who I think are doing an absolutely outstanding job. And we are fortunate in Montgomery County that we have world-class organizations and systems that have been built over many years within the food security space, within the space to advocate on behalf of our immigrant population, our efforts to end homelessness. There are many infrastructures that are all being tested right now for sure, but that put us in a somewhat better position than other jurisdictions. And so what I'll do is focus on two buckets. The first is the county's direct response to the crisis, sort of where things stand now. And then, as Jared said, focus on some of and examples of what we've been able to do thus far. But the numbers continue to go up. And it is a little bit concerning that the governor has begun to move forward with alleviating some of the restrictions at the state level. As an example, the parks, the statewide parks, he's alleviating some of those restrictions. But urban counties such as Montgomery County with much higher densely populated populations are continuing to see increases in the number of cases that we have. And while it is true, PPE has improved dramatically, we are only testing beyond the private providers at a rate of 500 tests per week right now. 500 tests per week. And so we are not even close to being at the ability to test all the people that potentially have the virus, let alone the frontline workers who by virtue of their jobs can't socially distance and need to continue to work with these individuals. And as we learned earlier this week, about 2.3% of the county's entire population has been tested to date. And so the CDC, although the president tried to restrict its access, the CDC did issue guidelines that provide a roadmap for jurisdictions to reopen. The state of Maryland and Montgomery County only comply with one of those 4 criteria, and that is bed capacity within hospitals, which we have thanks to a variety of efforts of our 6 hospitals. But the other 3 categories, testing, contact tracing, and the other elements that are in place have not even been close to being met yet. And so it is very much alarming and concerning that because of the fatigue, people are starting to go out more, and this is just going to even further exasperate and make even harder the work of all of the people on this call. And so it's something that we're focusing on from a policy perspective. I will say that the good news is the county has been able to and will be announcing in the next 2 or 3 days an additional contract to increase our testing capacity from 500 per week to over time, and we're not exactly sure how much time, but we've been told weeks, not months, to get to a point where we are at 2,000 tests per day, which will put us in a much better position moving forward. And obviously we are tiering the priorities of people that access those tests to organizations and staff and workers like the people that are on this call whom gave the presentations you gave, because they're going to continue to do their work, and we need to make sure that they and their clients and the people that they serve are safe. We have been able to allocate $20 million to date for small local businesses. We received over 6,000 applications for that money, and 5 million of it was allocated specifically for restaurants and retail, and it was targeted to small businesses. I want to also state this was a grant, not a loan. Unlike the PPP and what is being offered at the federal level, because we know that it's going to be important to provide cash on hand and flexibility for these organizations. We have also provided $5 million in direct cash family assistance, and the county executive announced last week he has added $5 million on top of that, and we are prioritizing those families who are not going to be receiving the $1,200 check from the federal government, oftentimes people whom are undocumented, but as George said, do pay taxes and contribute to our community in every way imaginable, economically, socially, and culturally. These are our kids, these are our families who are not getting the benefit of the federal stimulus. And our priority is making sure that those most vulnerable have access to those funds, which of course includes our immigrant population. We are expanding our homeless services, and we are working right now with hotels, because what we're starting to see in this next phase of the crisis is because so many people have had to continue to go to work because they're in that essential category, they may be working in apartment complexes or living in apartment complexes where you can't socially distance. It's literally impossible. And so people whom are concerned they have the virus are going home to their families and obviously being concerned that they're infecting their families. So we're looking at identifying hotel space to help provide some relief for those families, and we are working on that as well. We have also, from a policy perspective, essentially provided a rent freeze that not only runs through the governor's announcement of when the emergency stay is lifted, but increases it by 180 days beyond that. We've also added $2 million to a fund to help renters. And it is important to stress that we don't care whether people, what their immigration status is, only that they are residents of Montgomery County. And so we are working collaboratively. And then in the food security space, we are working aggressively to expand on the incredible work of MANA and the Food Council to provide them with the resources and support that they need to be able to carry out that work, and have recently announced an initiative to create a fund to reach out to our ethnically based supermarkets, so that our residents whom have different dietary interests or needs, those can be met. And obviously we're working closely with our school system on all of the issues that we know are going to arise with the educational gap that has significantly increased, we are sure, through all of this. So, and then lastly, I want to just say a couple of things. I've been exhausted and overwhelmed, as I know everybody here is, and I know everybody in the community is, but I am confident that the gaps in the system that have been identified through this crisis, this presents us with the unique opportunity to address those as we come out of it. And so we will be focusing on the council on appropriating funds as necessary and as we are able to address the immediate needs. But we are already starting to look towards the future, and within the Health and Human Services Committee, we will be looking at the gaps in the system, in our public health system, and see and work hard to make sure that we shore those up moving forward. So there's a lot more I could discuss, but for purposes of time, I wanted to stop there and once again thank all of you, and just show my deep appreciation on behalf of the entire council for everybody on this call and everybody out in the community.
Thank you, Councilmember Albornoz, and appreciate all the information. We've posted some other information on some of the slides, and I know there were a couple of questions. The slide deck and the materials from today, as well as a recording, will be made available to everybody who signed up. So if you weren't able to grab a piece of information, you will get this hopefully by early next week, Monday or Tuesday. So I wanted to just move into Q&A, and I appreciate, I know we're running a little short on time, and a lot of our presenters have been more than generous and are willing to stick around for a couple more minutes. So if folks on the webinar have a couple more minutes, maybe we'll go to about 12:40, because there were a lot of really great questions that came in. And I will say, if we don't have time to address them, we will do our best to get you answers from not only the presenters, but there were some questions specifically around county policy and state policy that we'll follow up with. We have everybody's information. So wanted to start off, there were a couple of questions that people asked, what's the best way to volunteer if you have to stay at home, or you're not really comfortable with interacting with people? What would your suggestions be on how people can help out?
Is that for anybody in particular, Jared, or?
I was gonna say, just open it up to the four of you if anybody wants to jump in.
Well, I'll start by saying that we're working with, as is the whole Food Security Task Force, with the Volunteer Center. And I think somebody put in the chat the link so that there can be a good funnel of matchmaking. The Volunteer Center has done a great job. But as I indicated, if you go to manafood.org/COVID response, we can sign people up for things like food runners, which is no contact. But you could take your own initiative to do things like write letters to our staff to keep their spirits high, because as Gabe put so eloquently, these frontline workers are putting themselves in harm's way and their families, and we just want to let them know that they're appreciated. Then other activities like the virtual food drives or regular food drives are very helpful. And of course, fundraisers that enable us to purchase more food as we're quadrupling our orders.
This is Diego.
Oh, go ahead, Diego.
Sorry. Very, very quickly, in addition to contacting each one of the organizations, I think it's really important for you, I saw a question about your children, to write to the elected officials, to tell them how proud you are of Montgomery County's response. They need to hear, they make assumptions that all of us, but they hear louder voices, that counter the values of the county. So being proactive in letting our elected officials know that they're doing the right thing. So please take a minute, 2, 3 to write a short letter, send them an email, the executive, the council, the board. They need to hear from you, because there are antagonistic voices that are not in support of what the majority of us are. So please take a few minutes and write. We need them. For example, from the Black and Brown Coalition, write to the board. I'll share information with all of you later, but it is important. They need to hear from the majority of us.
Mark, I think I heard you wanting to chime in.
Sure, I thought that was great, Diego. I agree with that 100%. I would just say that if you want to do something from home and you can hop on a call with somebody who's a job seeker, a lot of people are going to be trying to get back into the workforce. So you could become a job coach from your home. And I know that I heard something like that from Diego and maybe even from George, that if you're a Spanish speaker as well, there are a lot of folks who are going to need that one-on-one assistance, and they're going to need a place to call, even to just go over their resume or maybe to do a practice interview. So you could be a great resource to just have someone do a practice interview with. So I'd recommend doing that. And you could do that with a wider circle. I'm sure you could do that with CASA and with Identity. And so I would just recommend those as great ways that you can do them right from your living room. You don't have to go anywhere to do that. Jackie, I don't know if there's a similar, kind of social support need that you would have that somebody could just do on the phone from their home, but I bet there is.
Thanks, Mark. One of the other questions was particularly, we got a couple of these. We have a small army of, somebody wrote 6th to 12th graders in MCPS who have some free time on their hands and need, service learning hours. Are there any suggestions for young people in the county who may want to volunteer? Particularly, there were some questions around maybe high school students who want to be tutors. Any suggestions on places to direct our young people?
We are experimenting with that with adults and some high school students. The capacity is not big because again it is difficult. It is difficult. If you want to reach out, I'll provide you with a number later, but I'll be happy to see. But I cannot promise you, because sometimes, and this is a truth that some of us sometimes don't say, but sometimes to manage volunteers takes a lot of time and resources too. So we need to be careful. So we will entertain the idea, but depending on how feasible it is or not, we were to follow through or not.
Yeah, I think similarly to Diego, obviously he hit the nail on the head. It also, we need additional capacity sometimes to manage those volunteers, but there are possibly some places that people could plug in. We, for example, similarly do what we called before was an after-school program we called Mi Espacio, My Space. That's a mentoring, homework assistance project, peer learning project from folks at different high schools. So there's a possibility that maybe something could be figured out, and happy to provide the contact to our director of education that can kind of look at the feasibility as well, just as Diego said.
Thank you, George and Diego. Jackie, this is a specific question, probably more for you and Manna. There's been a lot of interest in folks who wrote in about growing food and gardening. We know that's something that a lot of people obviously can do from home. Is there any way for people who are doing community gardens to be able to grow the food and make sure that it gets donated to the right communities?
Yes, this is definitely a model that we have even when we're not dealing with a pandemic. So it's wonderful to expand it as the Grow Row model. The only thing that's different is that now we do need to just be aware of the drop off and keep everybody safe who might be harvesting food for us. But it's just a matter of giving a call, and I can put in the chat our director of logistics, Edwin Drijas, and you can let him know when it is that harvested food would become, so that we can quickly refrigerate it.
Great, thank you, Jackie, and we'll make sure we get that information out as well to everybody that logged in. One of the other recurring theme questions that came up, and I saw one of our wonderful participants, Susan Post, offered her Association of Local Clinical Social Workers and Therapists. And Diego, you mentioned, and I know that a lot of the work that Identity does is around mental health. What about meeting the physical and emotional needs of the clients that you all serve, and any advice, particularly for communities that are being really hard hit by COVID, around providing mental health services and grieving support to families that may be experiencing loss, during this time, and any way that folks can help with that?
So as I mentioned before, all of us as human beings can play a role. The hardest hit by housing needs, by food insecurity needs, are also affected by mental health needs. Maybe many of us are too. We're not exempt from those impacts. So we just, before entering this call, we had a volunteer therapist, a clinical psychologist, give a training to all of our staff and some county staff. So again, those were in English. If individuals have a specific specialty, or they want to train other people or coach other people or to provide, I would not call it clinical supervision, but mental health support to staff, some of our staff who are seeing the impact of COVID on people every day. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to work with them, and not just identity. I'm pretty sure that each one of the other three organizations will benefit from their staff having time with therapists so that they can help them process what they see every day. So training us so we can be better at reaching out to communities, and also providing staff support would be great.
Thank you, Diego. Susan, we'll make sure that we connect you with Diego and his team if your association really wants to help out. Thank you for that offer. One of the other questions was particularly, folks want to know when things are going to reopen. Do you all have any plans for when your organizations may be able to, to sort of step up operations a little bit more in person, or is that contingent on where we are with the health crisis?
I can speak for CASA. I mean, I think that this is actually something that we're these contingency plans are something that we're putting together now. Obviously, similar to a lot of organizations here, we thrive on a lot of group type of educational settings, a lot of group activities, a lot of group legal clinics, for example. All of that is going to change because of the reality. So we're obviously going to have to put some limits on the amount of people that can come to one of our centers, et cetera. But we anticipate doing that in the next couple of weeks, obviously, but I think we are in for a completely new reality where we're going to have to monitor number of people in. There's going to be a drastic limitation in the number of group activities we can hold, obviously, a lot of individual appointment-based services. I think that's kind of the reality of what our services are going to look like over the next almost year, I believe, right?
I just would add that I don't know how long it'll take, but having a test that's available to everyone, that it provides you with a positive or negative quickly, will allow us to go back to a new normal faster. Until then, we will all be playing with fire, because it's impossible to reassure clients, particularly those who are vulnerable, that things will not happen, and our staff. So we had staff that got COVID. So we need to be very careful. I'm talking about identity as to how and when we go back. And as I agree with George that I don't know what normal looks like anymore.
Yeah, and if I can just add, I like that turn of phrase, Diego, playing with fire. We are very, very conservative. And so as we are doing we have a phased plan. We're obviously going to follow local and state guidelines on the phasing in of opening society. But we couldn't be more eager to get back to our model of choice, where people can shop for free for what's right for their culture, what's right for their health, their family size. But we will not go back until we can have some level of certainty that everybody is going to be able to stay safe.
Thanks to everybody. And I think in the interest of time, we're going to move to wrap up. I know there were a couple of questions more detailed on service learning hours. I know our team can reach out to MCPS we talk pretty regularly to the folks over there and make sure that everybody who participated today gets information specifically on how to sign up for the service learning hours and make sure that all that information gets out to the community. I just again want to thank everybody who stuck with us. We still have almost 100 participants sticking with us a couple minutes over time. Thank you to all of our 4 panelists, to Councilmember Albernaz, and you know, just constantly amazed by the capacity for giving and amazing community coordination that I've seen from folks all across the county. And with that, I don't know if any of my colleagues from District 18 want to wrap up or say anything as well. All right, well, hearing none, thank you again to everybody, and be on the lookout either Monday or Tuesday for a follow-up email from our team with all the details. And with that, please stay safe and try to enjoy an otherwise cold Mother's Day weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jared.